I think all the calamity was avoided.
Let's see. Oh, you plugged it in.
Oh, hold on.
It's better when it's plugged in.
Yeah, we're done. I was just going down to say, don't say something.
Well, actually, it's mine.
And we had a question up there.
It's mine.
Oh, sure. It is.
Maybe flies on the wall.
That was it. All the questions I had.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Good.
I mean,
Brian may that be the most difficult problem you face today.
Wow, this one's so good.
he's got the sound is going to be
No, I
don't need to use it here.
Yeah, off the back.
No,
All right, good.
my
So I'll
boss
ask
was asking
everybody
me
to
to
go ahead
so I
and
needed to get
take your seats and settle in.
He was lost on the stories
Yeah, I know.
on where it was.
So, this isn't just back to you,
Even worse.
Okay.
We are ready to get started. Very pleased to continue talking about how we regulate diet, energy, especially diet, and to help us with that we have Dr. Brian Wansink. He's a marketing professor and director of the Cornell Food and Brand Lab, which he founded in 1997 at the University of Illinois and then moved to Cornell in 2005. He's also co-director of the Cornell Center for Behavioral Economics and Child Nutrition Programs and co-founder of the Smarter Lunchrooms movement. You may have read, as I did, his 2006 book, Mindless Eating, which popularized the kinds of issues that he's still researching. He has fascinating looks at how environmental triggers influence how much we eat and how much we enjoy it. He's written more than 100 articles and books, currently writes the monthly column Chew on This for MSNBC, as well as the column Food Think with Wansink for Prevention.com. And one other note, he spent 2 years in DC, actually, leading the development of the USDA's 2010 dietary guidelines. So he's really come at this from the policy perspective at the national level and as a scholar. And we heard him last year. He was terrific, and looking forward to this presentation.
Well, thank you very much. So this is a historic day. I just got to call it. My wife passed her naturalization test today. Half an hour ago. Yeah, after putting it off for 20 years. It's like, you really wanted this, didn't you? So it's also kind of historic that this is, I think, the first time that Jim Hill's been here in Denver for 4 days in a row. So I heard this, somebody, it reminded me of this story I heard about this amazing astrophysicist who came up with this great idea, kind of a Nobel Prize-winning idea, and he went on a 200-city tour of the United States, presenting his idea to universities, governments, things like this. But he hired a driver, and he to drive him, and he and the driver got along really, really well. They hit it off, and every time the driver would take him to give the other talk. And toward the end of this 200-city tour, he says, "Geez," he says, "this is really getting old." The driver says, "If you need a break, I've heard your speech about 190 times, and I could do it. I could dress up like you, and you dress up like me." And the guy thinks for a minute, he says, "Let's try it." So the professor sits way in the back of the room, wearing the driver's clothes. The driver gets up. He does an incredible job presenting this. There's no flaws. There's no ums and ahs. It's perfectly on time, except when he finishes, the moderator says, "Well, that's great. Well, we have time for one question." And this person asked this question, and it's a brilliant question. It's got citations in it. It goes on for about 5 minutes, but the guy's kind of pompous. The question asker. He's going on and on. And you see the poor guy up on stage, his head's dropping. The professor back doing the same thing. And the guy finishes the question. He says, "And what are your thoughts?" And the guy says, I hate to do this, but I have to admit, that was the stupidest question I have ever heard in my life. And just to prove to you how stupid it is, I'm going to have my driver in the back answer it. I think of Jim giving similar talks all the time. So what they asked me to talk about initially was kind of the role that companies can play in helping make us profitably do so. And a lot of these ways end up being sort of like nudges that can be done in one way or the other. So I think that's what the abbreviated title in your book says, like nudges and slimness or something. And to take a look at this, but we all have biases. And I think the biases that we end up having can be pretty strong, or they can be pretty weak. I think a lot of times if somebody does a study on, let's say, diet soft drink beverages and gets money from the diet soft drink industry, it's a very small bias. It might even be no bias. But I think the strongest biases we have are ones that are pretty much imprinted in us by the time we're about 20 years old. And here's my childhood bias, and that I grew up in a farm in Iowa, but it wasn't any farm. It was a small, failed farm, okay? So we grew corn and soybeans. The thing is, you can grow up and you can read every book you want to on everything you want to, but when it comes down to it, the view I have toward most agricultural things are imprinted by seeing what worked and what didn't work in a family farm. So if someone says, I bet you have a lot of strong feelings in GMO. I go, yeah, I absolutely do. Probably not the ones you're suspecting. Or people might say, well, I bet you have some strong feelings in organic. I'm like, yeah, and probably not the ones you have. Because these initial experiences have an incredible bias and impact on us. And my second thing was when we moved to town, my dad was working for a bread company at a big factory, and he went on strike for a while, and we were going to take our family trip to see my grandpa in Montana, and when we asked why, my dad said, we would if people bought more bread. And some experiences like that really changed the way you view companies and the role that food companies play in our life. But something else had an impact. When I was younger, I wanted to be a food journalism professor, and it was to write about these issues related to food, but from the perspective that I had. And so I actually got a master's degree in journalism, and I can see not everybody is happy with that at the time. And was never really a working journalist, because then I decided I wanted to be a professor of journalists. Well, I'm now a professor of journalism, a professor of other people now. But I got my PhD in consumer behavior, and my first job was at a place at Dartmouth College, the Tech School of Business. And I thought I was teaching a course called Services Marketing. It was one of my courses, and I lined up the whole thing related to the food industry, because it's kind of neat. Everybody's done it. Everybody's worked in some facet of it. And the first day of class, there's maybe 60 or so students in the MBA students in the course, I said, okay, how many people have ever worked in the food industry in any way? Working at McDonald's, delivering pizza, being a bartender, being a waiter, waitress, detasseling corn, selling vegetables door to door. How many people have ever done that? Here we have. In this Ivy League class of 60 people, how many people do you think raised their hand? There's three, but as far as one of them, there's really only 2 other people. And I thought, oh my God, but it goes to the point that if what our biases are, our experiences, there's a lot of people out there, especially extremely highly educated, very elite people, that have not had any real experience in the food industry or any real experience kind of doing the sort of things that normal people do. And I think that's just as important to realize that not only, sorry about that.
Sorry, excuse me.
Not only do we have biases, but a lot of people you're going to be working with as sources, and a lot of people who are very, very, very visible in the media really don't have any real experiences with the food industry and as real everyday people would. So it's important to keep that in mind, that their perspective might be very skewed. Okay. And not because of their opinion, but because of their experiences. Okay, we're going to have a dinner party flashback. A lot of times when we talk about business, would be food companies like McDonald's you're going to hear from tomorrow, or Disney, or Diet Coke, for instance. It's difficult to not want to point fingers at them, and indeed a lot of the critics do, because they say if it wasn't for you, if it wasn't for food, we wouldn't be fat. But we had a dinner party flashback a while back, and we used to live, this was about a year ago, we used to live on the edge of a little wooded area, and so they had a little stream going through it, so there's all these problems with like, critters! And so there's a problem with raccoons. And so during this dinner party, again, some of our neighbors are very, very elitist, but there's this big discussion about these raccoons, they're in our garbage all the time. The nerve of the raccoons. People got railing on at a dinner party about raccoons. And actually then somebody said something I think really intelligent. They said, really, you can't blame a raccoon for being a raccoon. Okay, raccoons do it, raccoons do it. So their solutions, not necessarily win-win solutions. So solutions, I think some sort of raccoon poison or something. I know. Knowing these people wasn't poisonous, probably is just like knockout. Let's trapping them and releasing them, over at the other side of town. Or, using, and this isn't a real gun, this is a tranquilizer gun. It's like, really? You're going to tranquilize a raccoon? Yeah, and in all these cases, who should do this? The city should do this. The city should do this because it's a city problem. Well, I think these are all win-lose solutions because they either cost us a lot of money because we're paying for some silly person to tranquilize a raccoon, or it's sort of sucking for the raccoon, especially if this is indeed poison. Oh, whoops, I forgot to put in the tranquilizer dart. That was a bullet. So those aren't very good solutions. But another solution is simply, well, if raccoons are going to be raccoons, do this. And if you said, well, why don't you just put like a strap or something over your garbage can? That's going to keep them on your garbage. And that's really, I think, what we're going to look at when we look at the food industry is how can we do things to let them be what they are, but help us kind of nudge us in the right direction. Okay? So you've heard of the 4 Ps of marketing. It's promotion, pricing, product, place. But I want to talk about another P, and this is almost a package. And back in 1996, I was at the University of Pennsylvania as a professor. We started doing all this research on what we call mini-size packs and how they could, for about 70% of the population, cause people to eat less, but they'd also be willing to pay more for it. And so I thought, wow, this is a really cool solution for things. So I called up to these food companies like Nabisco and M&M Mars, Kellogg's, and a few other places, and said, hey, I think I found a way that you can help people eat less and you can make more money. I can drive up, I'll present, I'll pay my own way. And they said, sure. And I would go up and I'd present this stuff, and the first half hour would go great, and they'd be kind of nodding. And then I'd get to the ta-da punchline where I'd say, and if you reduce the size of your packaging to these, I had 110 calories to 110 calories, people will pay more, but they'll eat less. And it was, it was like I'd just been yodeling for the last 10 minutes. And people were staring at me like, oh my God, he's crazy. Give me that tranquilizer gun.
What disturbed them about that? Paying more sounds good to me if I'm a businessman.
Yeah, it is. But I think what happened is they weren't really very good about thinking outside the box. So all they could say is, for the last X number of years I've done this, we've been trying to move as many pounds of M&Ms or as many pounds of Cheetos or whatever as we can. Now you're saying we can make more by selling less. And I think it caught them as very, very abrupt. And what happened is about 3 months later, somebody from Nabisco did call and say, I think we like this. Can you come and give another presentation? And then things started taking off. But it gave me a couple ideas about this. First of all, most companies, most MBA students aren't very good about thinking outside of the box. They're good about asking for coupon drops, asking for more money for a campaign, commissioning some research, but they're not really very good about thinking of solutions that are much different than what they've been doing. But second of all, I also realized that if we give them profitable win-win solutions, eventually it will be something they consider, but sometimes it's up to us as thinkers, as researchers, as writers, to suggest some things they might want to try. And I'll give you some examples, but we're going to talk about, I'm going to start with something called the buffet paradox, then a project called seductive nutrition to show how the seller of mayonnaise figured out a way to make people healthier by still selling a lot more mayonnaise. Something called the smarter lunchroom movement, and then how food marketing can make us slim by design, and I'll end with some news you can use. Okay. So here's our lab, and our mission here is to discover and disseminate what we hope will be transforming solutions that help people eat better. I mean, is everything we come up with transforming? No. But by aiming at 100, maybe hitting 90 or 91, we think we're doing better than aiming at 50 and getting a 61. So a lot of the stuff that was talked about earlier was in the book Mindless Eating, and another book in September 23rd called Slim by Design is coming out that's going to cover a lot of the stuff we talk about, or it's going to cover, one chapter covers what we're talking about today then. So I got this curious call a while back from a major, one of the 4 major newspapers, and the newspaper was talking about this result, this really cool thing that, or not really cool, that this thing they did in Los Angeles about 2 years ago, where they changed all, in order to get kids to eat better, lunchrooms, they got rid of everything that they thought was unhealthy in school lunchrooms. They got rid of the cookies, they got rid of the chocolate milk. I mean, they left like escarole and I think tofu were the 2 last remaining items. And this woman, and they did this for about a year. And this woman called and she said, "Hey, you know, there's this big change that happened in Los Angeles. We just got the results in of how things happened." And he goes, "Guess what happened?" And he said, "People stopped eating lunch." And she goes, "How did you know?" And I think what happens is if the models we have about people end up being too much in terms of what people ought to do, we don't really step back and say, well, what will they really do if you make some change like this? If you outlaw chocolate milk, what will they really do? Are they going to say, well, I'll have white milk, because, you know, after all, it does have less sugar. No, they don't do that. They drink less milk. Other people, you're forced to take white milk, throw it away. Still others bring Mountain Dew from home. So let's take a look at this buffet paradox. And if we look at buffets, a lot of people think that buffets are pretty evil. And so there's been proposed solutions to get people to eat less at buffets. One is to give a surcharge to anybody who goes there. One is to tax buffets more, do consumer education, tougher licensing, address them in the dietary guidelines. And there's a recent one, zoning them. You know, it's like you put them like, you know, outside the city limits next to all those like seedy businesses. Dancers, Chinese buffet. So, but if buffets are evil, why is it that about half the people who eat at buffets are skinny? Okay, you know this. I mean, most of us are staying over at the thing.
Spring Hill Suites.
Spring Hill Suites, yeah. I mean, you know, like half people there are skinny. If you go to any pizza buffet, half people are skinny. Not everybody, no, but half. So what is it that skinny people do different than heavy people? Well, if you ask them, what do you think they'd say?
Eat less.
Yeah, that's right. You just say, I don't know. Or they say, maybe I eat less? But they're not even sure. But you would be sure. You could kind of find out what they do if you observed them, if you stared at them secretly. Binoculars on the other side of the buffet. You can figure out exactly what they do. So here's what we did. We took 12 coders, and we watched 370 diners in 7 states. And actually, Colorado was one of those states. And what we did is we observed everything from who they were at, to how many times they chewed food, to where they sat, to all sorts of things. But we used these secret agent tools, and that one of them was a weight mat. So we put this right by the door, so that when somebody walked in, they'd kind of walk in, they'd step on the mat, and bling, it'd show you.
Seriously? And these people didn't have any idea they were parts of these studies?
Oh, no. This is just, these
That's
mats.
wild.
These mats effectively look like just sort of those black indoor-outdoor carpets. Yeah. We had this. Well, this bag, this
I'll be
thing back
leaping
front.
over those now.
There's a laser, you know, this sort of laser grid thing where It shows those little, it's like out of something like Mission Impossible 3 or something like this, the laser grid. It's just, so that would show how tall somebody was to the nearest quarter inch. Of course, they're wearing shoes. That didn't work quite as well as we thought, because I think that about 4 people, lost their retina. So we ended up having to put those marks on the buffet, like the marks that, they have outside the 7-Eleven. So we had those marks on the buffet to figure height. We had clickers and Cracker Jack stopwatches, meaning they usually didn't stop. Now, in observing all this sort of stuff, what do you think a skinny person might do unknowingly differently than a heavy person? What might be something?
Spend more time looking at the food before deciding?
That's exactly right. The first thing they do is 73% of all the people, of the skinny people, when they walk up to a buffet, they walk and they look at the buffet, and, and then they pick up the plates. In contrast to that, 78% of heavy people do just the opposite. They go right for the plates. Pick up the plate, and, look at the first item, hang on, do I want it? Is it yeah, I think I could stomach it, yeah. So that's the first thing they do. What do you think something else is they do? What else skinny people do differently? Not even know it. And the sort of thing that if you ask them, why'd you do that? They go,
Smaller portions?
yeah, smaller plates actually. And in the places where there's smaller plate sizes, they end up they end up being almost 7 times more likely to take a smaller plate than the big ones. But also smaller portions, we find that they put fewer, the items they take end up being good-sized portions, but they just take fewer things. Yeah, that's good.
But what's the percentage on the smaller portion size?
7 times more, they're 7 times more likely if there's both a small and a medium plate available.
Right, but what about in terms of the portion sizes of the food they're choosing?
No, we don't have that. We just have the number of things they took.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh, really? The number of things they took?
yeah.
So they took how many fewer? Or is that again the 7 times?
No, the 7 times was just the percentage of people who took a smaller plate than a larger plate. Yeah. I'll get you the paper too. It has the exact percentages. What else do you think he did?
They made healthier choices with what they chose?
That's kind of subjective. I mean, it probably is, but yeah.
Didn't go back as many times?
No, and actually they ended up going back like 0.2 more times, but they put less on their plate. Yeah, that was just published in JAMA a short time ago. Yeah. Well, what happens is they end up on average sitting 16 feet farther away from the buffet than heavy people do. 16 feet farther, and you're 3 times as likely to face away from the food, whereas the heavy people typically will sit staring down that roast pork. They're more likely to sit with their side or their back to the buffet. Yeah.
I don't believe either one of those.
Yeah. 16 feet farther, about 3 times as likely. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They chew on average 15 times per bite, whereas people who heavy people on average only chew 12 times per bite. Okay.
Why does it matter if they're sitting further away if they don't go back more frequently?
I think what happens, and again, we're not looking at causality, we're just looking at correlations. I think what happens is that, first of all, if you are sitting that close and what you're seeing is person after person going up, the norm is that, geez, it's normal to go back all the time because everybody I'm looking at is going back. A little bit farther away, what ends up happening is that it's a little less salient, it might be a little bit more work.
But I thought you said that the skinny people did go back more times.
It's not
0.2
significant.
more times.
Yeah, they went.
Okay.
Yeah, they went something like a 2.35 versus 2.32 or something.
Okay.
Like that.
So then why would it be significant that they sat further away? Since it didn't make any difference how many times they went back.
Yeah, I think it might just be that it suggests a bigger norm. If you're kind of sitting there and you're seeing people go back over and over and over, maybe what you're doing is you're keeping track also of how much they put in a plate and stuff. And skinny people put less in the plate.
Are you suggesting that people choose where they're sitting? Because when I go into a restaurant, a buffet, Chinese or otherwise, I'm seated, I don't have a control over where I'm sitting.
Yeah, in the distance, we just use the buffets where people have seated themselves, which is a pretty small percentage of buffets. It's about 3 out of 30% or so.
Can you give us the number of chews statistic again? I was
Yeah.
Get it down. You said 15 or 16?
No, it's 15. Is 15 and 12. It's a difference of just 3. Yeah. We also found some really other strange things. We found that they're much more likely. Again, we did not include Asian Americans or Asians. These were just Caucasians because we don't want to confound things with a lot of Asians who tend to be thinner to begin with. We found that of the Caucasians, they ended up being 27% chose chopsticks. Only 9% of the heavy people used chopsticks. And we found a couple curious things too, which we couldn't figure out. That skinny people were much more likely to sit in a booth than at a table, and much more likely to put a napkin on their lap than heavy people. Which makes absolutely no sense. Makes absolutely no sense.
Did they fit in the booths better?
Until you ask that question.
Yeah.
It's more comfortable for a skinny person to sit in a booth than a heavy person. It's also why the napkin is more likely to be on their lap. It's because they're not often pressed up against the table.
Yeah.
So, if we were in public health, we'd say, okay, geez, there's some great tips we could use that we could give to people. Okay, if you're going to go to a buffet, scout it out, take a small plate, use chopsticks if you can, sit far away from the buffet, and don't face the food.
Have a perimeter.
Yeah, the perimeter.
No tables closer than 16 feet.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Yeah, and we don't. Is that causal? No, it's just correlational. But if you want to be a skinny person, do what skinny people do.
Eat less.
Well, that's sometimes easier said than done, as to like the last 97 speakers have said. So here's our skinny diner, 16 feet far away from the diner, 3 times likely to face away from it. She's sitting in a booth using chopsticks, smaller plate, and stuff like this. Here's our poor heavy diner. I think I gotta talk to our cartoonist. He gets a little bit overboard and things. I think sitting at the buffet, sits closer, faces it. Stuff.
Also not very overweight.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Who else? What was interesting though is when people finished the buffet, and we asked them, "Hey, why'd you sit so far away? Why did you scout out the buffet? Why did you use chopsticks?" What do you suppose the response was?
I always do that.
Yeah, I always do that. Or they just say, "I don't know." Or is that what I did? Really? I was facing the food. Really? Yeah. And I think that's what happens. A lot of these habits that get set up that make these skinny people, maybe slim by design, probably have an analog in other parts of their life where they're doing things that they don't really realize are pushing them in the right direction rather than the wrong direction. But now, who else would be interested in information like this?
Yes.
Restaurants, yeah.
Exactly. So we got a call shortly after this study was published. We got a call from this guy. And he says, my name is such and such. He goes, my dad owns some Chinese buffets in central Pennsylvania. And we wonder if there's any way that we can use this to try to get people to eat less. And they could care less about the health of the people who eat there. What they cared about was reducing food waste and making people still pay $8 but take 20% or 25% less. And so, we thought, this is a great win-win thing. So we ended up coming up with a bunch of suggestions. We said, okay, well, as soon as people get there, have your waitress or hostess seat them as far from the buffet as possible, around the perimeter. Okay. Then as those tables fill in, you can bring them closer. Have chopsticks as a default. They can always ask for a fork. Have smaller plates, and things like this. And then to get people to scout out the buffet, we should put the plates not on the side of the buffet, but in back of the buffet. So people have to walk behind and trudge behind. At least they'll see half the buffet. And then these guys also did something kind of clever. They took those folding Chinese screens and some plants and stuff and put them kind of in front of the buffet. So you could still see the buffet, but you couldn't see the whole thing. It's a little bit... So this guy does this. And we had a few phone calls, and he said, I'm going to make these 5 changes. And so about 4 months later, he calls us. He says, hey, can I come up and just visit and see where you guys are at and stuff? And it's like about a 6-hour drive. And so he drove up, and he said, hey, how those changes going? He goes, oh, yeah. He says, really good. He says, but geez, he says, it took me about 4 months to make those changes. And I said, 4 months? Now when I said, he called and said his dad owned some Chinese buffets in central Pennsylvania, how many were you picturing?
About
3
4.
years.
Yeah, I was like 3 or 4. And I said, oh, how could it take 4 months? I mean, we're talking 5 changes just to 4 or 5 buffets? And he goes, oh no, he goes, my dad's got 63 buffets. And the amount of money that they were saving each day in savings, he told me that it's pretty decent, but I can't remember, like let's say $40 in food waste or whatever. If you take 40 times 365, because they are open every day, times 63, that's huge savings. And so that's why I think oftentimes when we look at solutions for things, we look at top-down solutions like government policy or industry standards, things like this. But what we don't often do is look at sort of these left-to-right sort of solutions, credentialing, things like this, or the bottom-up solutions. That's looking at what are the win-win things that companies can willingly do, and would want to do, not because they want to be nice people necessarily, but because they can make a lot more money.
That was $920,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
918.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
At
It
$40.
struck me as very significant. Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, but you see, there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of opportunities for personal activism too, in the right sort of way. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So the second part, this is kind of a crazy thing, but our taste is very suggestible. I know that's hard to believe, but we did some series of studies. Here's a guy. He had a very healthy series of restaurants. Problem was nobody ate there. Okay, his normal stuff, comfort food, but he'd substitute applesauce for oil and chocolate cake, or he'd bake things with fried things like that. And he said, what can we do? And so what happened was we did something where we took the items like seafood fillet and chocolate cake and just gave them descriptive names, because we know that our taste buds are really suggestible. And so we ended up kind of putting a seafood fillet on for a couple weeks, and we could take it off for a couple weeks, and we put it back on, called a succulent Italian seafood fillet. Now it is just a dried out fish stick. In fact, it's a dried out fish stick from 2 weeks ago, okay? But what happens when people see these things, they're 28% more likely to take it. When they would take it, they rated it as better. They rated the restaurant as more trendy and up to date, and they even rated the restaurant chef as having had more years of culinary training. Okay, well, this is a guy who'd been fired from Arby's 2 months ago. Culinary training. But the thing that was amazing about this was it didn't matter how ridiculous of a name we gave things. We called chocolate cake, this is bad chocolate sheet cake, and we called it Belgian Black Forest double chocolate cake. Now, it doesn't even matter that the Black Forest isn't in Belgium.
Right.
Yeah.
People are going, Antwerp! Oh, yes, yes. I love it. And the thing is, this has really no limits to it. We have a research restaurant that's open once a week, and people come in for a prefix meal, about $25. And we do something. One week, what we did, and the whole idea about your taste buds being suggestible. If you, and then Jeff was saying you guys went to a Thai place last night, and when you're eating dinner, if you had an appetizer, you kind of go, geez, this is really great. I really like the ginger taste in this. Do you want to try it? When you taste it, what are you going to think?
Taste of ginger.
Oh, you're going to think that ginger's overwhelming because you're looking for it. And you're going to think the taste is incredible. But alternatively, if a person said, wow, this tastes really sour. Is this too vinegary, do you think? What are you going to taste? Yeah, vinegary. You're going to say, oh my God, I have to send it back. Oh my God, I'm poisoned. Well, we find that simply the first experience a person ends up having with food, whether it be an appetizer or even when they walk in the door, can have an incredible halo or an incredible shadow over the rest of the meal. So what we did is we brought people in, we ordered tons and tons of cases of this cheap $2 wine called 2 Bucket Chuck, Charles Shaw wine. And when people came, we soaked off the labels, put them.
But that's really decent wine.
It is.
It's cheap.
It is. It is. but I'm going to show you a really quick way to make it not very decent. Okay, a quick way to make it decent is to have the California label on, which it is actually from California. The way to make it not very decent is to soak the label off and put the exact same looking label on that says it's from North Dakota. California, we think, good wine. North Dakota, we think, no, my grandma's from North Dakota, and I still gotta go, Fargo, the movie. Well, so what happens is when we brought people in, we would say, we would take half people and say, hey, thanks for keeping your reservation. We've got a complimentary bottle of wine because you kept your reservation. It's new Cabernet from California. And then take that and just plop that bottle right in the middle of your table. Because for you guys, we said, thanks for keeping your reservation. The waiters and waitresses said the same thing. They said, we have a complimentary glass of Cabernet. It's new from North Dakota. Poured it. And then just indignantly put that bottle right in the middle there. Now, you guys, you're going to end up eating longer, about 90 minutes longer, actually, until we kick you out for the next seating. You end up rating the food. The wine is better, the food is better. And most of you, or many of you, rather, made reservations to come back within the next 3 months. You people, even though the meal was exactly the same, the wine was exactly the same, you had a much less magical time. No, you ended up not thinking the wine was any good. You still drank all of it. Everybody drank all the wine. This is terrible. Do you have any more? Is that empty? Awesome. So after you drink all the wine, you rated the food is less good. Bless you. You rated you didn't stay as long. And when we asked if you wanted to come back, make reservations to come back, most of you said no. And one person even said, no, I says, I'm really busy for the rest of my life.
Good one.
Now, it's hard to believe that this happens. I mean, the thing is, if any of you love to cook, this is really great news you can use because you can become a much better cook really fast if you just end up having the right cues surrounding you if you're serving up for nice plates with the paper plates, nice music. Oh yeah, give something a name. But I'll tell you how powerful this is, and let's see if we can hear this.
To demonstrate that, Wansink tricked some of our own staff, 7 of 2020's college interns. First, he added some chocolate sauce to vanilla yogurt. Then he told the students,
we're going to be doing a little strawberry yogurt taste test. Okay.
On the table, he had some strawberry yogurt containers.
Put your blindfolds on.
The students put on blindfolds, tasted the yogurt, and then Wansink asked them to compare the strawberry tastes.
I think they both taste really strong with strawberry.
All the students were certain they were eating strawberry yogurt.
This one has much stronger strawberry taste to it.
Just tastes more like strawberry.
With this woman, Wansink tried something different.
I'm tasting a couple of present yogurts today.
He didn't tell her what flavor it was, so when he asked her to rate the strawberry taste,
Honestly, I didn't notice it's strawberry.
Okay, good.
and yet by the time I interviewed the group, she too had accepted the idea that she'd eaten strawberry.
Follow up with the question like which one is more strawberry. I was like, I should choose one.
They all believed it was strawberry. Actually, none of them was strawberry. It was vanilla yogurt with chocolate sauce.
Stop. Okay.
Maybe it can't be.
Well, I thought I tasted strawberry. I guess also when I opened my eyes, the 2 yogurts in front has strawberry on the box.
I think you're joshing us right now. I do. Because I feel like they was definitely taste of strawberry.
No, it was vanilla yogurt with chocolate sauce. But you thought it was strawberry.
Tasted like strawberry. I swear it did.
The moral to these stories, as Wansink, is that we are much less taste sensitive than we think we are.
We don't want to really believe that you're fooled by something as simple as
See, that ends up being this ends up being a much better. This is a solution. It's not a problem. It's a solution of how we can get kids to eat healthier stuff. It's how we can get convince ourselves to eat healthier things. Because we are, except at the very edge of the thing, like chocolate lava cake maybe over here, non-fried okra over here. I know. We were very suggestible in the middle. And so, you know, I was I had this really cool chance a couple of times to be a visiting professor at the Apicius Culinary Academy in Florence and then Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. And we do things with chefs, or I guess I should say training chefs, and do these things where I just rename something and have people kind of rate them. And simply change the name, or changing whether I put something on a paper plate or a nice china plate. Change how much these chefs, I mean, these are incredibly well-trained chefs, rated the food. So it has a powerful impact not only on them, but on our dinner guests. I was doing something a while back, and there's a really great British publication called The New Scientist. Anybody familiar with it? Chris, you might be. It's really, it's very cleverly written, and they're going to do a story on taste, and they came out and kind of trailed me for about 3 days, this guy and his crew. And at the end of it, he goes, you know, he says, really all the stuff you do, it's just pretty obvious. Which, you know, didn't make me feel really happy or really good. I'm like, oh, well, I guess. He says, I've known it for a long time. He said, because I'm a great cook, and nobody for years ever, I have dinner parties all the time, nobody ever commented on my cooking, ever. Because what would happen, he says, because I'm a good cook, I'm efficient, we would be having a glass of wine in the living room, and all of a sudden I'd say, look, let's go have dinner. We'd go out, I would serve things up, and people are kind of going to themselves, wait a minute, you didn't even spend 2 minutes making this. It's probably not going to be very good. I mean, in reality, he'd pre-prepared it. But he said at some point, he changed that approach, and hey, about 15 minutes before he's going to serve, he'd just get up and take his wine into the kitchen, just stand there, take a spoon, bam, 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 hit some plates, make some noises, and they're in the other room kind of going, wow, he's really working hard, this is going to be a good meal. And what happens is once he started doing that, he got all sorts of compliments from people about what a great cook he was. Because again, they expected it to taste better because they thought he's putting more work into it. Well, now how could a mayonnaise company use this sort of stuff to get people to eat better? Now there's a couple questions here. Unilever food. So one of the things, we know it for toothpaste and stuff, but the food company sells lots of ingredients to restaurants, mayo, butter, pasta, and most of these things are not very healthy. So I'll give you an example. This is like what they sell. Like mayonnaise, 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 peanut butter, ragu, ice cream. So really stuff that's really not very healthy. And they came and they said, we want to help our restaurant clients, that's the main group they sell to, decrease the calorie content of 1 or 2 top-selling menu items by 100 calories or more. Now, why would they care whether the restaurants that buy their stuff reduce the calorie content of their menu items?
Because there's a push in Washington toward restaurants reducing their calorie counts.
Exactly. There's a push toward doing that. Do they want to be nice guys? Well, probably not, but it's probably going to be good for business. What other advantages could it be for them doing that?
They can market themselves to their...
Exactly. Exactly. So here's what they did. That's exactly, they can market themselves as differentiated. So why would they want to do that? We got bingo and bingo. So how could they do it? Well, one thing we came up with was just using this idea that people taste what they think they're going to taste. We came up with this thing. I didn't like the name. I had a different name for it. They called it seductive nutrition. And the idea was, what restaurant goers really want is they don't want healthy things, but they want slightly healthier versions of the stuff they like. Slightly healthier. Not real healthy, slightly healthier. They want more vegetables. They want things to be lower in fat, kind of the right size portions, grilled, fresh ingredients, and lower in calories. Now that can be done fairly easily and still have kind of good stuff. But the challenge then, they challenge all their people with it. It's like 5,000 different restaurants. So it's, first of all, choose a top dish that people like and figure out some way to reduce the calories by 100 calories. That could be just cut the portion size if you're going to be lazy. It could be maybe using less butter, changing ingredients, or doing something to make it a little snappier. But then also kind of romance your dish with a brief description so that people, if they might otherwise have noticed that it's going to be sort of overcome with their expectations instead. So one way was, we had a bunch of words that we'd found worked in the past, was using some of these words and descriptions and changing things in different ways like this. Okay. taking some things out, making things smaller, stuff like that. And there, that's better. And so one of the things that we end up finding is that within 6 months, 5,000 restaurants pledged to do this to 1 or 3 menu items. And the estimated item sales, what we found is that on average about 500 million calories were taken out or pledged to be taken out that year of the food supply, which is about 147,000 pounds. Which I know it's not enough, not fast enough, but I think it's a great case of how a mayonnaise company actually did something that was kind of win-win to help move things forward. So how powerful is seductive nutrition? Well, it not only gets us to eat vegetables, we find it even gets kids to eat them. And I want to talk about the Smarter Lunchroom movement, which is something we launched a few years ago. And the whole idea was, what can we do to get kids to eat healthier in school lunchrooms? You know, it's not necessarily to take the cookie away or get rid of the chocolate milk, because once you do that, kids say, forget it. If there's nothing there I want, I'm going to bring some from home, I'm going to skip lunch, I've seen this about a dozen times, I'm going to order takeout food and have it delivered to the site's door. You ever seen Domino's Pizza? You drive up to the side of the school and you go, oh my gosh. So this started when I got a call from the New York State Department of Health a while back, and they said, you know, our goal is to increase the sales of whole fruit in New York State schools by 5%. That's like increasing the number of apples by 5%. How much do we need to subsidize fruit in cafeterias to increase apple sales by 5%? Well, you know, the thing is, if you're in public health and the main tools you have are taxing or banning something, you don't really think much more creatively than that. So they said, how much do we need to do this? Well, let's take a look. Here's what an average school looks like. The fruit is in a metal chafer pan underneath the darkest part of the lunch line under a sneeze shield. Do you think a 5%? Do you think cutting the price in half is going to increase sales by 5%? No, probably not. So we said, here, just do this. First of all, kids don't know how much fruit costs, and their mom and dad are paying for it anywhere for the government. We said, just put it in a nice bowl and put it in a well-lit part of the line. And 5 schools did that, and sales over the course of the next 3 months didn't go up 5%, it went up 103%. 2 schools said, no, that's just ridiculous. It'll never work. Their sales went up 0%. And then one school kind of missed, we'd stopped by and we missed a couple crucial meetings with the food service director. So she kind of did this on her own. And when we finally did get a hold of her, she said, oh, you know, I think I did it wrong. Nice bowl. Well, she said, we put it in a nice bowl, but then I went and I found a desk lamp in the closet and kind of took it out, set it right in the lunch line next to the fruit and turned it on. And we said, oh, wow, how'd that work? She goes, sales went up 187%. So we're now like, okay, put it in a nice bowl next to a desk lamp. Well, shortly after that, we got a call from the USDA, and they said, you know, 2/3 of all high schools have salad bars, but most of them just go untouched. They're just like they're composting. You know, just right there. Nobody's getting anything from them. They said, well, what do we do? Do we add more stuff? Do we cut the price? What do we do? Let's take a look at what, and again, if the main tools you have are, you know, changing prices of stuff, that's your solution. Here's a typical junior high school. Kids would come in a door there. There's a la carte items up there. There's a hot lunch line here. The salad bars here, a couple cash registers. This salad bar, really, it's like mulch, okay? Hey, you know, cutting the price in half isn't going to do nothing. And so we says, why don't you do this? Why don't you just move it 10 feet? What we found is you move salad bars, and kids are really routinized people, just kind of like we are. And so the kid who gets a piece of pizza, has got his baseball hat on backwards, you know, walking the lunch line. And then he moves it. Bam! He hits that salad bar. And he's like, whoa, something's different. Something is not right. And he has to figure a way to commit to go around the salad bar, and he chooses that. Well, that same thing happens for about 2 weeks. But then about the 2 weeks, what we find is that salad bar sales increase within 200 to 300%. Because all of a sudden, he starts picking up something somebody else does. And actually, in most of the schools where we do this, it'd be higher than 200 to 300%, but the problem is they just start running out of stuff. Because they're not really sure what's going on. Well, a bigger question is, what could you do to a school? What sort of changes or makeovers could you do for less than $50? If those two things have that big an impact on salad sales and apple sales, well, what else could be done? Well, one of the things we ended up doing is we first launched the Smarter Lunchroom movement, and I wrote this op-ed piece for the New York Times, just showing kind of how some things would look in a lunchroom. So, for instance, we find the very first thing you see, you're 11% more likely to take than the third thing you see. So, if that first thing you see, even if it's unfried okra, you're 11% more likely to take it than if it's the third thing, with 3 vegetables. We found that, simply giving something a name, calling something power peas or something like that increases, again, sales of food by about 28%. And this was so easy that even when schools would screw it up, like with the lunch lady putting the little light, it still works. I mean, here's an example of hearty vegetable soup. I mean, there's a grilled chicken roll. It's like a job offer. Going up and you can grill your own chicken roll. But it doesn't matter how ridiculous these things are. I'll show you a little bit of a thing about how these makeovers work. And again, I wish we had bigger speakers, but we don't. There you go.
The masterminds behind the cafeteria redesign are Cornell University professors. I wanted to know how they're going to basically trick teens into eating right. So what are we doing here?
First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a bunch of the milk, put it in front, so if a person's thirsty, at least they have the option of picking something up. At least they can reach over the white milk if they want to pick up a flavored sugar beverage.
Step 2. They took the pizza, which was the first thing in the lunch line, and moved it towards the back. And the veggies and the healthy beef burrito moved right to the front. Step 3. They renamed the healthy food.
We find that changing something as small as calling these mixed vegetables California blend and the big bed bean burritos increased sales by about 27%.
Step 4. They moved the fruit from a plastic tub into a pretty fruit bowl. And finally, they took the cookies and put them just out of reach.
We're going to have to ask one of the food service workers to help pick it up. We think that's just enough of a barrier to keep some percentage of kids from saying, whatever, I'll have lunch.
The professors rolled up their sleeves, made their changes, and now it's lunchtime. Oh, there she's getting her tray. She grabbed a sandwich. She's getting an Arizona iced tea, I think. An orange juice. And she got the cookie. So, Samantha, this time, you didn't get the cookie, and you got a piece of fruit instead. But why'd you get the fruit this time? Why do you think?
I don't know.
2%? Wow. By putting in a nice bowl. The sweet drinks were also harder to get to, and Jane, Marcy, Richie, and Levante fell right into our trap. Last time they grabbed Gatorade, Snapple, and Arizona iced tea, but this time
The water was just in front, so I just grabbed it.
sales of sugary drinks plunged by 17%, while purchases of easy-to-reach milk soared 46%.
Whatever was easiest to reach, it was good enough for them, and that was enough to get them to change.
Another hit, the big bad beef burrito sold out for the first time ever. Professors say, on average, students' plates this time around contain about 18% fewer calories, and they made healthier choices.
Now, do you remember Samantha when they said, last time you took a cookie, but this time you took an apple. Why'd you take an apple this time? Do you remember what she said?
I don't know.
And that's why this stuff ends up working so well, not just for them, what works for us. We've just we've done all the work with all the Google cafeterias. Those are pretty smart people. They're not silly junior high kids. And the same changes we made in these lunchrooms are similar to the ones we made at Google's headquarters, and they do the same thing. It's an engineer, undergraduate from Stanford in computer science, to hold that list like it, you get a Coke, you put it on the bottom shelf, and it's on the third from the bottom shelf. The whole list would take cookies. The cookies end up being 3 feet in back on the line versus right in front. Very, very small changes. To not take things away from people, just make them, to nudge them to pick up that apple instead of that cookie. There's a number of other things we did that are kind of fun. But one of the things that we're doing with the Smarter Lunchroom is we've come up with a 100-point scorecard. So, for instance, one objective of a school might be to increase fruit. And the second objective might be to increase vegetables. And the third might be to increase the percentage of people taking white milk, increase the percentage of people taking a healthy entree. So we'll have a whole bunch of different things that relate. They're all 0-1 changes. So for instance, with milk, we'd say, look, you want to sell more white milk? First thing you need to do is make sure at least 1/3 of all your milk is white milk. You can't have 4 cartons and expect people to take it. At least it's got to look like a normal thing to take, not like some aberrant weirdo thing that strange people do. So at least 1/3 of your milk has to be white. If you do that, you get a point. Second, if it's in the very front of the cooler, where people don't have to reach for it, you get a second point. Third, if it's in every single refrigerated area where you sell drinks, you get a 3rd point. So you see how this goes. So it's a really easy way for food service directors to get excited about making changes, because every time they check something off, it's a point. Most important, there's no ambiguity. There's no mystery about how they're scoring their lunchroom. And if they get a 35, right there, they can see 65 changes they can make that are low cost, no cost over the weekend, bring it up to a 40 or a 50 or a 60. We find this has worked really, really well, to the point that the USDA is using this as one of the requirements, or one of the encouragements for anybody applying for any money funding, that you have to fill out the scorecard. You don't have to say what your score is, you just have to fill it out. We find that that very act of a person checking things off has an amazing impact on 20% of people, and I'll tell you the rest in a second.
I wanted to ask about the USDA encouraging schools to do that. Have you looked at any correlation between the schools that said they couldn't meet the new healthy lunch nutrition requirements and whether they used your stuff? Yeah, exactly, because the correlation is like 0. No, but I'll tell you why. I'll tell you, so I think food service directors are no different than professors, they're no different than journalists, they're no different than people who own Dairy Queens. And that 20% of all of them they're lean, they're hungry, they're maybe competitive, they're ambitious people. I mean, okay, just like you, that's why you guys are here, right? The other 20%, the other extreme, they're like, hey, I'd rather die than change. Ooh, the sweet release that death will bring. They would really rather die than change. They'd rather defend what they've been doing the rest of the time since it's much more comfortable. And then, did they apply for this? No. In fact, I'm sure that their editor long ago gave up on even showing anything to them because they know they go, no, they take work. But then there's another 60%. And again, I think this is for everybody. It's food service directors, it's professors, it's journalists, it's hardware owners, store owners. The middle 60% want to do something, they want things to be better, they want to improve, but they're a little bit nervous about being the first one to do it. They really want more of a guarantee that if they do X, at least Y might happen, and they don't want to be seen as foolish. Okay, and food service directors, same thing. Almost everybody who was the initial people to adopt this were in that top 20%, or they were in the next 60% where they saw somebody succeed in their district and they didn't want to be left behind. The people I find in general who are the problems with the food service, with the new USDA guidelines, are the people who said, Okay, well, God, if I have to make sure every kid has a fruit or vegetable, I'll do it, damn it. Here's your vegetables. I'm going to get them. Okra for everyone. But they did absolutely nothing else. They just plopped them on the line. I think the places that have succeeded to a larger extent are people that have done something in addition to that. Either they said, hey, this is the excuse I have to try to shake things up, or to rethink how I'm going to do this. Rethink maybe how I'm going to change my staff. So yeah, I just sent an op-ed piece to the Wall Street Journal just a couple days ago on that. Yeah. Great question. But I think oftentimes that 1/3 measure, that 20-60-20 thing, is a useful thing to keep in mind when you start thinking about behavior. Because way too often we can think of what people are going to do in a uniform way. And if we say, well, some people might adopt it, some people might not. So on balance, I don't know. It's a toss-up. But I think if we see things in terms of that 20% who are they're innovative, they want to try new things, they're sort of ambitious, and if we see things as the 20%, we say, hey, look, whatever the context is, there's 20% who are never going to change. They'd rather die than change. I think it helps us put things in a lot better perspective when we're trying to figure out what's going on. Well, the last thing I'm going to look at is the slim by design. And the basic idea behind this is that you can try to be slim by willpower. Well, that's really, really hard. No one wants to go on a diet and count calories. Has anybody ever filled out like a food diary, kept a food diary? It's a good thing to do once. Because it makes you feel the pain of people who go on diets. You know, just, oh. I have everybody in my lab do it once a year, just so they can kind of get back into thinking how people struggle with this. So that's one thing. You can be slim by counting calories. You can kind of be slim by willpower. You can also, I think, a lot of public health people think you can be slim by education. If we just tell people that an apple's better for them than a Snicker bar, they're not going to eat a Snicker bar. But I also think this easier, and I'm not a big believer in education. This is having been executive director in charge of nutrition education for the USDA. And this is having been the president for the Society of Nutrition Education. Actually, the first thing I did when I became president was I was able to get everybody to change the name to the Society for Nutrition Education and Behavior, because that's where I think all the action's at. And we're going to look at slim by design. Now, we find that 80% of our food is purchased within about 5 miles of home. It's purchased or eaten within 5 miles of home. You say, well, but I commute 30 miles home. It's like, you do, yes you do, but the person in Winesburg, Ohio, who walks to work or lives at home, you know, probably evens you out a lot. The 5 places at home, our main grocery store, 2 or 3 favorite restaurants, work, and school. That's where almost all the food we buy and consume is eaten. And the thing is, there's a lot of win-win changes that can help us eat better. So, for instance, we found that if you people who end up taking food home from restaurants, ask for doggy bags or to-go bags, on average eat 31% less of whatever they take home. Oh, that's a huge amount less. So you say, well, okay, what would be the solution? Well, our solution could be, well, we could have half of it packed for home, or we could ask them to offer half-sized portions of popular entrees. Now, what do you think would happen if you went to your favorite restaurant and said, hey, you know, I like eating here, but that $20 steak would be, or $20 pasta dish, I'd eat here more often if you had a $10 pasta dish that was half the size. What do you think they would initially do?
Okay.
Tough.
Yeah.
Tough. What if 10 people did that? And what if somebody called and said, you know, I got 7 guests from Japan that are coming, and these guys like to spend money and they like to drink. Do you have any half-sized portions? Because your portions are just way too big for them.
Oh, they would.
Yeah.
Because they'd get the money from the alcohol.
Yeah, you know, they would. But what's interesting is they make money from the food, too. So that just happened with them. So here's what we did. We did a large chain restaurant to show that this would work. What we did was we ended up asking them to have half-sized portions. But one of the things we ended up finding is that half-size portions, yeah, they increased, 950 people off bought half-size portions, but full-size decreased by only 280. which means there were more people going to the restaurant. But in addition, what happened is side items increased dramatically.
Or could it have been that people that were eating appetizers before now are ordering half-size?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. So you'd have like Ma and Pa Kettle would be sharing a large chicken dish, but now all of a sudden Pa can order steak for the first time in 30 years. So they end up buying a side dish. They splurge and they get a coffee. So we find these win-win changes are all over. And that's the way to set these things up, is to show that companies can make a lot more money, just like Unilever made more money selling stuff. At the grocery store, we find that when you buy 18% more healthy foods if you shop healthy aisles first, like the high fiber and things like this. And you can ask them to move the healthy foods in the first 3 aisles. I just finished a really cool big project where they gave me an entire island in Denmark. And they said, you can make any changes to the 12 supermarkets, there's 11 supermarkets on the island that you can convince to make changes in. And I was able to convince 7 of them to make changes, and they would move major things, and things worked really well simply by coming up with one candy-free aisle, but having really high margin things in, having fruit in the front to cue people to think about fruit when they first walk in, even if they don't buy it, putting the healthy things in the first 3 aisles.
Just quickly, so have you studied, do people really walk the supermarket aisle by aisle by aisle? Is that how they shop?
Some people do. I mean, there's the perimeter shoppers, there's spot shoppers. But again, the thing is, we always need to break people into groups. And there's a ton of people that shop, and it's a fill-in trip. And fill-in trip people, you buy milk, diapers, beer, whatever the case is. You're just going to one place, and you basically know where you're going. Okay. It's where you see a lot of aisle by aisle by aisle shopping. Ends up being late in the afternoon, and on Fridays and Saturdays. Because people have a little more time, they're doing their major trip. Yeah, good question. In the workplace, we find that you pack a lunch and don't eat at your desk, you're going to be much better than people who don't. And also, you're not fooling anybody that you're really productive because you're eating at lunch at your desk. But we can also ask, we work with a lot of lunch places, and the first thing we tend to target is to try to upgrade their break room, so that's a place where people want to go eat, and that's someplace where they avoid just eat at their desk. So our opportunity, I think, is to come up with simple, scalable interventions that we can prove work for companies, but then also tell customers how they can do this. So, for instance, with the restaurant example, I called my favorite restaurant. I said, I'd like to have some half-size portions, and they said, oh well, we're not going to do that. I said, okay, and I said, because I bring a lot of guests from school, and that'd be neat. And I did call the next time. And I said, I've got these people coming in from Japan, and the portions are just way too big. And they said, would you consider a half-price menu? And I'm talking to the owner, and the owner said, no, that's not something we do. I said, well, I'm sorry, then we'll have to go somewhere else. Next time I called and asked the same question, he goes, we'll do it. So I think all it takes is a few people to ask. We had a local grocery store. I said, why don't you have, it'd be really cool if you had one candy-free aisle. So I got 3 girls under the age of 8. And go through an aisle with candy, and, if I got to be the bad guy, no. And they said, it'd be great if you had one candy-free aisle. And he goes, yeah, but I can't do that. Sliding allowances, people pay for the rent. And I said, oh, well, that's too bad, because really, I don't like going to the other grocery store way across town, but I guess I'll have to. And then I had everybody in my lab. I said, how many people in my lab do we have to have go say the exact same thing before they change? And by the time the 8th person asked, he changed. So, well, again, over these forces, I think here's what we're losing, is that personal activism, looking at market forces and how to make this work. Okay, in conclusion, it's going to go back to you. Don't forget about the raccoons. Okay, raccoons are going to be raccoons. And then some news you can use. Where do you want to sit when next time you go to a Chinese buffet? Far away and face away. How do you want to become a better cook in 5 minutes?
Make noise.
Yeah, give your names.
Serve on China.
Yeah, and what do you want to put in your home counter?
Desk lamp.
So how many people have a fruit bowl in the kitchen sitting out? Wow, that's really good. That's really good. what if you don't have one? What do you suppose would happen if you were to put a fruit bowl on your counter on day one? Nice big fruit bowl. What do you think would happen? Would the fruit start disappearing?
Not right.
Oh! Nobody touches it. It's crazy. People look at it like, what is it? It's a trap. No, nobody touches it at all. In fact, we find that almost nobody touches it until about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, somehow they think it's safe and the stuff starts disappearing. But only in the condition when it's within 2 feet of a major pathway in the kitchen. So if it's sitting, over on that table in the corner of the kitchen, it's just like, hello, goodbye. If it's next to your keys or it's next to, the drawer, your silverware or something, that's when it disappears. All right, thank you, and for more information, if you just research, my name and outreach pages or YouTube videos or consumer insights, you'll find a lot of other stuff along this line. So thank you very much for your attention. Yes, we have 5 walking minutes for questions. Yes,
Is
yes.
it true that you shouldn't go to a supermarket when you're hungry because you tend to buy more unhealthy foods?
You are exactly right. I thought you were going to say, if you said because you're going to buy more, that's wrong. But you just buy more unhealthy foods. So we just had a really cool study that's published in JAMA Internal Medicine where we put people on 18-hour fasts. And then we sent them to the grocery store. Well, whatever, Then we also did it naturally, looking at the people who shop just right after lunch versus just before dinner. And one of the things we find is they don't buy more stuff. Actually, if you're hungry, you buy a little bit less stuff. Because you're feeling miserable. You just want to rush and get out there and start eating. What you buy is you buy more convenient foods. And convenient foods are the ones that tend to be the worst. You'll buy more cereals and chips and things like this. So excellent. Because you don't buy more, you buy worse. Very, very good. And we find the same thing happens just looking at, we analyze the shopping habits of people who shop from 1 to 2:30 and the ones who shop from 4 to 5:30. At 4 to 5:30, again, people are just like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. Bugles, do they still make those? Guilty.
I'm actually, were you part of the change at Disney?
I've actually been working on a paper for a long time, but I was part of a different project at Disney. I don't know the one you heard about at Epcot Center about the healthy habit heroes. Yeah. No, but I've been working on a paper with them.
But what they're doing is backing up what you're. I mean, I think it was either Jim or John was telling us about how they, that specific. First of all, that's only what's being offered and only what's being pictured, and then you can you have to leap over those milks to get to that.
Yeah.
To get to that French fry or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
It's still there. Yeah. You can, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's very interesting.
It's very cool.
So based off of that very cruel thing you did to the interns on 2020, have you worked with companies on their packaging and how you can package healthy food to?
Yeah, that's really, really cool you say that. So we did this neat thing a while back that a lot of people said, can't have branding in schools because that's like marketing. It's marketing to kids. You can't do that. So really, branding how's that it's going to cause people to want cookies even more. And so we did a really cool study back then when we branded cookies and we branded carrot sticks and celery. And what do you think who benefits more from branding? It's the healthy foods. You brand a cookie, people go, whatever, I was going to eat it anyway. Yeah, I don't need a brand. But all of a sudden it makes this other stuff cooler. And so what we did, which was kind of neat, was we said, what are some changes? What are some things that supermarkets do, cereals do, for instance, to make them really enticing to kids? And why can't healthy cereals do the same sort of stuff? Because if you look at the way, let's say, Trix is marketed, that looks fun. You look at the way Kashi Golin is marketed, it's like, animal feed. You know what I mean? So why can't they do that? So this company asked us to figure out what could they do with their healthier items to make them more evocative. And one of the things we found was, it was a cereal company. One of the things we found was cereal. You might have seen this. One of the things we found that makes cereal much more evocative is when it has spokes characters, and the eyes meet the eyes of you. What happens is it increases feelings of trust, feelings of connection, and everything. Whether that be Aunt Jemima, whether that be the oats dude when you open the thing. What we found with cereals, that 51 out of 59 children's cereals marketed in 2012, the eyes look slightly down, 9.6 degrees down. They're kids. Whereas adult cereals, characters are like Wheaties and stuff, they look right at you. And simply doing this, it ends up having this big impact on not just connection, but on whether you choose or whether you don't. And then it's cool, we then did something where we manipulated all the eyes in cereal boxes and saw which ones people took. It's always the ones that meet their gaze. And so this is stuff like that for healthier foods that can be done. But they don't do it. They instead want to make it look very austere. And I think that the time's come for a sea change in that sort of thinking. Yeah, it's a great question.
So I'm curious what you think about like deceptive labeling. So cereals, for example, a lot of, Frosted Flakes might say whole grains, and there's all sorts of like healthy-ish labels and all that, but they don't necessarily convey this is healthy or not. Do you feel like that should be more regulated, or people just need to be more educated? Because I feel like people, obviously fruit in a bowl is like the fruit's healthy, and people kind of make that connection. But there's a lot of gray area of like mayonnaise with olive oil. Does that make it healthy? Does it not?
Yeah. But a lot of those things end up being health halos. So anytime you think something's healthy, it has this halo effect on every other evaluation of it. So we did something with soy, for instance, and we found that when people believed something had soy in it and they ate it, even though we said it had 10% soy or 10% just vegetable protein, people got, well, they thought it had soy in it, even though it didn't. Oh, this is terrible. This tastes like chocolate. The aftertaste, get it away from me. Help me, help me. But they also rated it as being much healthier, much more likely to reduce the risk of heart disease, much more likely to reduce the risk of cancer, much more likely to reduce birth defects. I mean, it's just crazy stuff, but it's a health halo of hearing the word soy. Yeah, now, regulating that becomes very difficult to do. The FDA does some things well, but what I like seeing that's been happening recently is a lot of companies have been stepping up, and they've been essentially pointing other companies to step in line too, and I like seeing that happen. Yeah, good question.
Very cool. Ryan, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Linda.